April 8, 1944. Above the Ruhr, Germany. At 21,000 feet, canopy rattle 8-barrel thunder. They called it a milk jug, a blunt snout that could not possibly dance with Messerschmitts. But German pilots laughed at the P-47 Thunderbolt until its 8.50 Browning machine guns rained lead on them in a single rolling burst. The promise is simple and brutal. Contempt meets massed fire, and the geometry of speed meets the arithmetic of armor. The air smells of cold oxygen and cordite. The boost needle climbs. The Thunderbolt tips over into a shallow dive that tightens into a hunting curve. At 300 yards, the streams converge. At 200, they knit. At 100, the wing roots thrum like a rail bridge taking a freight train. Spent brass flashes past the fuselage a hot, tinkling rain. A yellow-nosed fighter snaps across the windscreen, banking hard at 300 miles per hour. The jug rides the turbulence and carves down through 1,000 feet. In seconds. Thick, heavy, but it will not die. A Luftwaffe wingman will write that night. We will prove how a 7-ton fighter that few respected stitched the sky with 8 rivers of fire, held 350 to 400 miles per hour, dives with ease and turned the battle by surviving hits that should have ended the sortie, and how mockery gave way to a cold, professional fear. They had believed in the clean duel, the bright flash of cannon, and the nimble flick of ailerons. Doctrine said the light machine must outclimb and outturn the heavyweight. The short burst must be decisive. The ace must decide the field. German pilots read their cues from earlier years, from light airframes and steep, elegant fights where 90-degree deflections were the art form. American planners under a longer horizon fed a different machine, a fighter that could be an escort at 20,000 feet in the morning and a battlefield hammer in the afternoon. And when it came home with holes big as a fist, the crew would fit a new wing panel in hours and send it back by dawn. Availability was the quiet number that broke illusion squadrons that held 2/3 of their birds serviceable at first light, then nudged higher as spares flowed, and line crews practiced quick swaps on turbochargers and magnetos. Replacement rhythm hardened into habit. The time from landing with damage to a tested engine run shrank from a day to a night. And in the cockpit, pilots learned to think in ranges and windows instead of perfect duels, 300 yards, convergence for braided streams. A 4 to 5 second trigger discipline to keep barrels cool. Dive entries that started high and ended fast rather than tight circles, bled dry. Hit it once. It keeps flying, a German Staffelkapitän told his adjutant after watching a Thunderbolt stagger, recover, and vanish into cloud. He meant it as a warning, not a compliment. By dusk, the idea of the elegant duel was under pressure, and the field would learn painfully what happens when massed .50 fire meets a target that returns tomorrow. It did not start as a legend. Early jugs were heavy on the stick. The view forward could vanish behind that broad cowling. The turbo plumbing sang and wheezed like a steel organ. And more than one pilot, overeager in a low turn, felt the buffet and watched the nose fall through with an ugly shudder. A winter of accidents wrote new rules in oil and carbon. They learned not to chase a turn fight below 10,000 feet against a fresh messer with altitude in the bank. They learned not to spray at 500 yards and pray the volume would make up the angle. They learned to dive roll and climb, to use the airplane as a falling anvil and a rising pillar. Do not knife fight, do hammer strike. Armor glass and self-sealing tanks were not poetry. They were timed 10 seconds more to think after a hit. 20 seconds more to find cloud, 100 seconds more to reach home. Barrels burned if you leaned on them. Gunners counted the seconds, not the rounds, and learned the heat rhythm. Convergence was not doctrine, it was craft. Ground crews looked at tracers spiraling wide and tweaked a hair closer, 2 fingers inward until the streams wrote one bright rope at 300 yards. A diary line: first burst too long. Second burst, 2 seconds, wings to fuselage flashes at the root. Felt the whole machine vibrate. A radio call, 3 o'clock, low crossing, fast dive now. A test note, at 400 miles per hour in the dive controls remain firm. Recovery demands altitude but not luck. Late in spring, the unit stopped trying to be something the jug was not, and the airplane stopped confessing its early sins. The lesson awaited its proof, a day where men would hear the canopy rattle and understand why mass can be a surgeon's tool. It began with contrails cut like ropes above a gray river of smoke, a convoy of points sliding east toward an industrial throat that had been coughing steel for years. They called it a deep fighter sweep, but inside the squadron, the pilots spoke about the way down the moment, when the jug would stop pretending to dance and simply fall, wing steady guns, cold eyes on the count. At 22,000 feet, they saw the first rise of defenders' pairs and fours in climbing curves smooth as a knife. The leader did not order a turn. He ordered a shallow dive 200 feet per second, at first building to 3, then 4, and as the air thickened and the altimeter spun past 18,000, the Thunderbolts tasted their favorite element. The tactic had a plain name in the briefing, a phrase about energy and patience, but in the air it was more primitive. Stay heavy, stay fast, hit once. A Messerschmitt rolled in from high right nose, flashing white with cannon bursts that passed wide and high, because the jug's angle change was slow, deliberate, almost deceptive. The American did not bite. He unspooled another 1,000 feet and let the gap close to 300 yards, then 250, then 200. Trigger down for 2 seconds. The wing roots beat like a drumline. 8 streams crossed into a braided cable that walked from right wing to canopy. The German ship burst into a clawing skid, black smoke rocking from its cowl. Losses per mission are not a chant. They are a subtraction on a chalkboard. That morning, the subtraction began to favor the blunt-nosed plane. At 15,000, a pair of Focke-Wulfs shot through the formation's low edge and found themselves hunting iron, not silk. The jug that took their first bites bled fuel dropped 200 feet, then held. The pilot kicked rudder, the nose yawed, and a 4-second burst stitched the lead Focke-Wulf from spinner to cockpit, a line so dense the air looked torn. Later, the mechanics would count the holes in the jug's wing, more than a dozen, and still they would taxi it to the revetment by dusk. Numbers slipped through the day like cold water dives, initiating at 400 miles per hour and ending above 300. Convergence set to 300 yards. Magazines that allowed 4 to 5 sustained 2-second bursts before heat forced discipline, and altitudes that let a recovery pull of 1,000 feet without bending the airframe. For the defenders, the pace was new. They would climb slice and then find that their prey did not agree to the dance. The jug left vertical, returned horizontal, and where the Messer expected a turn, it found a hammer coming down. The pilot with the yellow tape on his stick, a habit for counting his bursts, felt the canopy shiver, that soft rattle that meant the slipstream was thick and the speed was real, and he rode it through 2 passes, each one shorter, each one closer. His wingman murmured a line that would show up in a German interrogation summary, a week later translated with dry care. The heavy one chooses when to fight. The interrogators underlined it twice. When the squadron coasted home, 2 Thunderbolts were missing, 1 pilot rescued from a field by farmers, another gone with a wing sheared off at 5,000 feet. But the maintenance board showed a dozen aircraft back on the line by nightfall, panels drilled out and replaced, barrels changed, turbo ducts tightened. The number that mattered was not just the enemy count. It was that cycle from damage to readiness, hours, not days, and the knowledge that tomorrow the same weight would fall from the same height, with the same 8-barrel Thunder. By evening, laughter in the ready room had the edge of respect. In the debrief, one German prisoner, eyes reddened by wind and smoke, spoke softly. "We thought it clumsy. We were wrong. The hook to tomorrow was already in the air. If a heavy fighter could do this at 20,000 feet, what would it do with bombs and rockets at 2,000, where the ground shook and the bridges mattered? They hung bombs under the wings, and the jug did not protest. They fitted bazooka tubes and learned the angle that kept the rocket wash from chewing the paint. They changed propellers and found a new edge in the climb, and the same 8 guns wrote the same hard script at treetop height. Mission counts climbed. Sorties per day nudged from 1 to 2 for fresh airfields, sometimes 3 when the weather smiled, and the line crews were magicians. Loss rates slid in the months that followed, as pilots stopped forcing turns and started forcing choices, as pairs kept altitude in the bank and learned to trade speed for position only at the last possible heartbeat. Meantime, between failures on the big radial improved when a run of bad magnetos was chased out of the pipeline. Availability crept up by the quiet scrapes of wrenches and the muscle memory of crews who could pull a panel in minutes and reseal it in less than an hour. On the other side, a Staffel log began to show a different vocabulary. They come in steep one-pass guns, like saws, one pilot told a field clerk through clenched teeth. The heavy one does not break when you expect it to. As the campaign widened, bridges that had stood since before the war took hits from 500-pounders, rails buckled, and road columns learned to fear the buzz building to a roar and the sudden chopping tremor of 8 guns spitting 1,000 rounds in seconds. There was an Allied shortcoming, and everyone knew at range. Before the long tanks and different routes, there were days the bombers outran their hammers, and the sky felt thin at the worst moment. Pilots cursed the needle and the miles left to the target. Planners sketched a different map and taught a different rhythm, and the gap narrowed. By the time the summer matured, the Jug had learned to be 2 things in one day: a high escort for the first hours and a low killer by afternoon. And the sound in the canopy came faster now, a rattle that ran into a full-bodied thunder as the nose came down. Behind the airfields, a grid of plants and depots moved like a quiet engine. Fuselage barrels rolled out of one line while engine shops balanced valves and chased oil temperatures that ran a few degrees hot in August. Crates moved by rail and river. Replacement wings came with preset hardpoints to cut fitting time. Gun barrels shipped in bundles with gauges to keep field alignments true. Line chiefs counted not planes but hours on line. When a bird soaked up hits, it came back into a ritual of triage where 3 men decided in 5 minutes whether to patch tonight or swap tomorrow. Turbo-superchargers that once waited in the corner for depot work could be changed in a tight window by crews who knew every clamp and hinge. Training was the multiplier. New pilots did not memorize poetry about duels. They flew patterns that taught patience in the dive timing at 300 yards and discipline on the trigger. Instructors built hours that mattered not just total time, but time at entry speeds, time in recovery, pulls time, feeling the shiver and not panicking. Lose 10, return 20 was not a slogan. It was a pipeline fact when the replacement machine and the training cadence matched the line chief's logbook. The survivability math lived in rivets and routines, armor that gave seconds, tanks that did not flash, hoses that did not weep under pressure, and guns that ate belts without choking. By autumn, the field felt different. You could smell speed on the ramp, and you could count on the men in the shed to hand you back a ship that would take a hit bite back and bring you home for the lesson to compound again tomorrow. The handoff to the end was simple. The Jug had turned mockery into a rule, and rules outlive campaigns. In the quiet, after the thunder, the manuals bent toward the math that had been proven in the sky. Organized quality at scale beats isolated brilliance. Post-war handbooks wrote calmly about energy tactics, about entry speeds, and patience, about convergence set not by hope, but by data. Civilian fields took the maintenance gospel to heart: standard spares, quick decisions, training time that mirrored the real work. Museums display the Jug as a brute. Crews remember it as a patient machine. German diaries remember the day laughter ended in the rattle on the canopy and the long rolling thunder of 8 guns that would not stop.